Welcome into the Best Bell Fantasy Football podcast and live stream. We're going to go through some fantasy football questions and answers for week 15 as I go through some of my rankings for the week, a few predictions, and also give you some fantasy football tips as we head into these Saturday and Sunday games. It's a lot of fun seeing the 49ers utilize George Kittle and him having a boom week to start off the fantasy playoffs. Hopefully you had and started George Kittle. He was my tight end 3 for this week, and I feel like I was even too low. The consensus was tight end 5, so I felt good about moving him up. So, yeah, we are excited to kick off week 15 with a great Thursday night game, and let's get the rest of the week underway.
Hey, really the only thing that gon' be normal is distribution. Normal folks gon' infuse some. Optimize your lineups and you feed the rest, you mute them. Turning it up, these numbers are loud. Peeping this game from a nimbus is wild. Making it rain while I embrace all this risk, I'm insane. Talking about that best bell, I'm the best rest till into the next well. Guess I got next still. Best bell, I'm the best rest till into the next world.
And of course, drop your questions, comments, and any players you want to chat about in the comments section. If you like the content that I'm sharing with you tonight, make sure that you hit that red subscribe button. We are very close to 500 subscribers, which is phenomenal for the community. So I really am thankful for all of the support that y'all have provided during this fantasy football season, and also just the feedback, the questions. Y'all are great in the community, supporting each other and, of course, supporting me. So thank you as we get into it here. Okay, Serendipity Trick Shots starts us out with, I may have made a grave mistake, but I started Ayuk over Higgins. Now I can start Higgins at all because I have Hill and Metcalf is playing. Yeah, this is an interesting deal because Brandon Ayuk, last I saw, was not doing too well. The Brandon Ayuk take that I had, I was higher, I think, in consensus than Brandon Ayuk. Yeah, right now Ayuk is 2 catches for 19 yards, 4 targets, only 2.9 fantasy points in half PPR. Not very good. So yeah, that's a tough spot to be in because we don't know what T. Higgins' status is going to be. We saw T. Higgins not play very much on Sunday. He went missing during warmups, according to Coach Zach Taylor. So that's a pretty big problem that you don't know if you're going to start Higgins. You can't start Higgins. And then Tyreek Hill, is going to have the snow in Buffalo. That's going to be an interesting matchup. I don't know if y'all saw Serendipity Trick Shots, if you saw that Coach Mike McDaniels was wearing a I Want It Colder shirt or something like that. And he was just strolling around the practice facility. It was just like a dog move right there, a power move. So I appreciate you pointing that out. And that's a tough spot to be in. It's Ayuk not performing. This was a Kittle game. I mean, we knew it was going to be a Kittle game. Seattle gives up the second most fantasy points to the tight end position. So you were firing up your George Kittles. Shouldn't have been a surprise. But to the chagrin of Ayuk, I wonder if there was, a little bit more, warning that he was not going to get what we wanted. Oh, we just got a Kenneth Walker 34-yard reception. So Kenneth Walker at 10 fantasy points is going to do okay. I faded him a little bit. I said he was going to be, between running back 23 and 33 or so. And I think I landed closer to running back 29, which is not great. Kenneth Walker, 9.9 fantasy points here in half PPR right now. And if we look at week 14, what 9.9 fantasy points would have been, that would have been the running back 21. So we were a little bit low on Kenneth Walker, but it's okay. Like, he was stifled for almost the entire game. So be it. Connor asking from YouTube, do you think Mike White is going to play? Do you think Mike White is going to play? Well, we can chat about Mike White here. I actually wrote him up, or my article for Fantasy Data is going to be dropping here shortly. So let's talk about quarterback Mike White. Oh, we just got a touchdown pass from Geno Smith to Noah Fant. There we go. Okay. Do I think Mike White is going to play? Yes, I think he's going to play. He's trending toward playing. Somehow, Mike White gutted through last week's game when he was hit. He had twice big hits by the Buffalo Bills. He still threw for 268 yards. He did finish as the quarterback 22. He didn't have any passing touchdowns or any rushing touchdowns, but he has a redeeming matchup this week. And the Detroit Lions give up the most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. They're susceptible to big plays. We've seen Mike White have quarterback 6 and quarterback 7 finishes against generous defenses before. And that's since he took over the Jets' starting quarterback spot this year. White is strongly on this streaming radar. And even if it isn't in a dome, Mike White is still my quarterback 8 on the week. His consensus is the quarterback 13. So I want to be in on Mike White this week as a streaming option. It's a good matchup. And you want to fire up your Garrett Wilsons, and you want to fire up a player that I'm going to be sure to talk about later on in the live stream, Elijah Moore. Do I start Latavius Murray or David Montgomery? Let me pull up the rankings so I can speak to that. But Latavius Murray was a disappointment last year, or last week. Like, I expected him to be in the low end running back 2s, but instead Latavius Murray against the Kansas City Chiefs, he had 3 receptions on 5 targets. He set a season high in targets. That wasn't, a problem for me, but he only had 8 rushes, 32 yards, because they were down so much. The Denver Broncos had to pass a lot. And that's why we got Jerry Jeudy touches. That's why we got Greg Dulcich touches, and Latavius Murray with 5 targets, a season high. He finishes the running back 37 in half PPR, but he gets Arizona, which is a much more favorable matchup. His consensus is running back 26. David Montgomery, on the other hand, is questionable for this game against Philadelphia. He is the consensus running back 19. And before the bye week against Green Bay, David Montgomery running back 12. The week before that against the Jets, which are a respectable defense, the running back 14. Against Atlanta the week before, the running back 6. So David Montgomery has played well, and I know that you're thinking, okay, well, it's the Philadelphia Eagles. They're a tough run defense, and they have been as of late. But you'd have to think that David Montgomery is still going to get the volume that you want to see, and Khalil Herbert is not back. So Latavius Murray, we've seen a dangerous floor for rushes from him, whereas David Montgomery is going to get 14 to 17 carries. That's what it has been for almost every single game. So give me David Montgomery over Latavius Murray this week. Serendipity Trick Shots. Who can I pick up that might succeed next week? A high ceiling running back would be great. Well, let's take a look at a few different options here. One running back who may, no, not him. I'm going through a couple of them. I don't like Cordero Patterson for week 16 we're talking about. Yeah, I don't like that. I don't like that. Do. Let me get back to this question, Serendipity Trick Shots. Maybe we'll see one pop up throughout the live stream, and I'll refer back to it. I'll keep this question in mind, though. Okay, a few players that I want to talk about tonight. I want to make sure get into the live stream so I can put it as one of those mini videos that y'all like on the YouTube channel. I love cutting those up too. It's just a lot of fun to see which ones hit, which one the algorithm is hitting on. And so here we go. The first player that I want to tell you about, you should be considering starting Ryan Tannehill, quarterback for the Tennessee Titans. And Tannehill is a matchup-dependent start. He's finished as a top 12 quarterback against the Giants, Raiders, Packers, Broncos, and Jaguars defenses. And as you know, like many of those defenses have lots of holes in them. And this week, there's also a defense that has a lot of holes, and that's the LA Chargers. It's an underrated matchup. The Chargers give up about 17 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, and they'll be looking to push the ball down the field against the Tennessee secondary, who gives it the most wide receiver fantasy points on the season. Long story short, this is going to be a shootout, and the Chargers are going to be able to move the ball well, so you'd expect the Titans, they're going to be pushed to move the ball as well. The projected game total for this matchup is 47 points. And while Derrick Henry should be able to move the ball well against the Chargers run defense, which is their weakest point, this will also put the Titans into scoring position a lot and open it up for either a Ryan Tannehill rushing touchdown or a couple passing touchdowns. Tannehill is on the streaming radar for the fantasy playoffs, especially with many other fringe quarterback ones with tougher matchups this week. Do you think Marquise Brown will succeed in these upcoming weeks? Joe from YouTube, good question. And actually, it will tie into another player, into Marquise Brown. I wanted to talk about Marquise Brown on this live stream. So let's get into it. Let me find the Marquise Brown. I'm advising you this week to sit Marquise Brown. And Kyler Murray, we know, is out for the year with a torn ACL. How can Hollywood access a ceiling? That's the question I have. He was already struggling to do so coming off of the injured reserve. Brown has finished as the wide receiver 52 and 56 each of the last 2 weeks, despite earning 8 targets each of those weeks. And this is a matchup this week. His matchup is against Denver. The Broncos are the third toughest pass DVOA matchup on the season. They allow the second fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. And let's be honest, DeAndre Hopkins is there, and AJ Green is somehow getting targets. Robbie Anderson is somehow getting targets. Greg Dortch didn't play this past game, but you wonder if he was just held out for a couple of snaps and giving him an extra week's rest. There's not a lot flashy about the Hollywood Week 15 matchup, or even if you're looking forward to Week 16 and beyond, Hollywood Brown just is not in good shape. Like I talked about the Denver, then he gets Tampa, who has, an occasionally stingy defense. But are you going to trust Marquise Brown in your championship week, week 17 against Atlanta with Colt McCoy as his quarterback? I mean, bless your hearts, bless your souls. I don't know if I could do that after benching him the last couple weeks, especially against him. Like Marquise Brown not doing well against the Chargers, who typically give up fantasy points to the wide receiver, and not doing well against New England, and not doing well, we project, against Denver. So I think that Marquise Brown is not in a good position to succeed for the rest of the way. If you can package Marquise Brown and another, if you can package Marquise Brown and a Greg Dulcich to try to get Travis Kelce, if your trade deadline if your trading is still available, those are the types of things that Marquise Brown has name to him, and he has production this year that matters. But if someone is, that's the type of thing where you got to try to fish around and see, is Hollywood Brown's value from the general consensus higher than how he should be valued? And he's being valued more than I think what he should be. His consensus this week is the wide receiver 28. And I don't think wide receiver 28 is a good ranking for Marquise Brown. I think outside of the top 30 is the spot for him. So you should not be aggressive in starting Marquise Brown. There's just not a lot of upside with Colt McCoy and sharing targets with DeAndre Hopkins and sharing targets with the other wide receivers. And James Conner, is going to get his touches as well. So we're not looking favorably about Marquise Hollywood Brown. Des Morse from YouTube, thanks for tuning in. What's up? 2 questions. Do you like Devonta, AJ Brown versus Chicago? And who do you think is the best pay up running back this week in DFS? Well, I haven't looked at the DFS one, Des, so I apologize. I'm probably not going to be able to answer that one very well. But that first question is a question that I want to answer pretty confidently. And in fact, the first answer to the first question is yes, you're starting Devonta Smith. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Don't get cute. You are starting Devonta Smith because he is the better option. You're like, who's the better option, Devonta Smith or the other wide receivers? No, Devonta Smith is the better option. Smith has finished as the wide receiver 10 and wide receiver 17 each of the last 2 weeks. He's earned 8 or more targets in 6 of his last 7 games. And you mentioned it, this matchup against the Bears is an absolute juicy one. It could be a slaughter. Smith has a projected, wait for it, 98% advantage against the Bears secondary per PFF. And you're like, well, what does that mean in the context? Well, PFF grades the matchups from 0 to 100%. So like 50% is halfway, it's average. Devonta Smith has a 98% projected advantage over the Bears secondary. The Bears are also the second most favorable pass DVOA matchup, and the Eagles' offensive line is projected to have a 62% pass block advantage per PFF. You are firing up Devonta Smith as a solid wide receiver 2 with wide receiver 1 upside. I mean, looking at what Devonta Smith has done this year, we've seen ceiling games from him, right? We saw the wide receiver 10 against Tennessee. That was a bad secondary. We saw the wide receiver 15 against Arizona. That was a bad secondary. He went 10 for 87, didn't even have a touchdown, finished as a top 15 wide receiver. And then, of course, against Washington, he went absolutely nuclear, 8 for 169 and a touchdown on 12 targets, finished as the wide receiver 1 that week. You are starting Devonta Smith this week against Chicago. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. One last question. Do I start Rachaad White over Leonard Fournette? I think we're getting to that point where you are starting Rachaad White over Leonard Fournette. This week, Rachaad White, he's the consensus running back 25 against Cincinnati. Rachaad White has finished as the running back 25 or better each of the last 4 games. He's had, at least 15 touches in each of those games. So he gets the volume. It's a matter of, is he going to fall in the end zone or is he going to have a breakaway play? Either way, Rachaad White is a must start for you as a running back 2 or even a flex play. Like he is a flex play consideration. Whereas Leonard Fournette was the running back 28 last week. He's finished as the running back 28 or better in each of the last 5 weeks, but it's been Rachaad White who's been ascending. So give me the ascending younger player. Leonard Fournette only had 4 carries in the game against San Francisco. I do expect he gets closer to like that 10 carry threshold, but long gone are the days like in week 6, week 2, and week 1 where Leonard Fournette had 20 plus carries. Those are gone. Rachaad White is going to be splitting carries with Leonard Fournette, and I think Rachaad White is a more dependable player moving forward. And I think the coaching staff wants to get more exposure near the end of the season. And there are some decent matchups. Arizona in particular in week 16. It's too bad Atlanta is week 18 for our fantasy playoffs, but here we are. All right, let's keep it going with a few other players. You should consider starting quarterback Matt Ryan. And it's very simple. It's a simple calculus for Matt Ryan. You're starting your quarterbacks against the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings have been the 6th best pass DVOA matchup on the year, and they allow the 6th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. Jared Goff, pocket passing quarterback with some weapons, just finished as the quarterback 4 and threw for 330 yards, 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. The Colts and Vikings, it's the 2nd highest projected game total on the week. And we've seen a couple spike games from Matt Ryan. He has 2 top 5 finishes on the season. So you should consider starting Matt Ryan in your fantasy lineups if you are desperate at quarterback. If I would have benched, a few of the lower quarterbacks. This is one where you want to get Matt Ryan, above your Daniel Jones of the world. I mean, could you put him ahead of Tom Brady? Maybe, maybe not. But you should consider like Trevor Lawrence, as a replacing Trevor Lawrence for Matt Ryan this week. And maybe that's a little spicy because Lawrence has done so well. But Lawrence gets the Dallas Cowboys, who give up the third fewest fantasy points and are the worst matchup of past DVOA against quarterbacks. So Trevor Lawrence is more of a fade for me this week. Matt Ryan is a mid to high end quarterback to starting consideration. Ryan N, Rashad or Foreman? Let me pull up my running back rankings here because I feel like they're pretty close. Okay. So right now, Donta Foreman is running back 25 for me against Pittsburgh, and Rachaad White is running back 23. So it is very close. I would give the edge to Rachaad White with the pass catching, the half PPR. If it was standard, I think Donta Foreman would move ahead of him. That's how I would answer that there, Ryan N. But we have to be encouraged by what Foreman has done on the ground, right? Even coming off of the questionable tag last week, he's had 2 straight games with at least 21 rush attempts. Yeah, he only got 74 rushing yards. He was really bottled up at the beginning of the game, but then got a couple more carries, had a little bit more room to run, finishes the running back 27 last week, and then he gets Pittsburgh and Detroit the next 2 weeks. So Donta Foreman could be an interesting, running back 2. I have him above consensus. His consensus running back 28. I have him at 25 right now. And Ryan N asks about, well, how about Travis Etienne? Yeah, Etienne is a different tier. He's going to get a lot. He's going to get the rushing, but also, we've seen some target games on the air for him. 5, 5, and 4 targets in games for Travis Etienne. Yes, he hasn't gotten, he didn't get targets last week against Tennessee. And when he left early from the game in Baltimore, like people were including that in his sample size, I'm not too worried about that. I think he's going to be in better health for this game. So I do have Travis Etienne ahead of those other 2. And I know that he's kind of dead to you, but he's not dead to me. Maybe I'm a squirrel with a nut, but here we are, Bradley with Travis Etienne going into week 15. A quarterback you should consider sitting this week is Tua Tagovailoa. And it's clear that Tua for the Miami Dolphins, he's just not right out there. And whether teams are adjusting to coaching schemes or there's the lingering effects of the sprained ankle from a few weeks ago, Tua has finished as the quarterback 17 or worse each of the last 3 weeks. And I mean, his receiving options, they've been struggling with injury too. Jalen Waddle is dealing with a leg injury. Tyreek Hill picked up a pesky ankle injury. And I think it was one of the slot wide receivers, Trevor Craycraft, who had been getting some rotation in, is also not expected to play in this week 15 matchup. So Buffalo only allows 13.4 fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks on the season. And this week's matchup only has a projected over under of 42, with the Bills as 7.5 home favorites. They're more than a touchdown favored over the Miami Dolphins. There's also snow expected for this game in Buffalo. So I wonder how the weather will impact Tua. But here we are. I think that you're going to have to find other options to start over Tua Tagovailoa. Like, for instance, you should consider, I have Mike White ahead of him. Of course, you need to consider Dak Prescott over him. The matchup with Jacksonville is just too juicy. Yeah, I think Tua is still a top 9 quarterback, but maybe I continue to move him down as we get reports of the weather in Buffalo and what that's going to materialize as. A running back you need to consider starting this week is Isaiah Pacheco. And yes, I know it was Jerick McKinnon who was the running back 1 this past week. And that's the chagrin of many managers who benched Jerick McKinnon. But Pacheco he's just been a consistent piece. He's not been the boom bust Clyde Edwards-Helaire. No, Pacheco has been consistent over the past 4 weeks since he's taken over the majority role. Pacheco's finished no worse than the running back 21. In fact, Pacheco's targets have increased each of the last 3 weeks. He had 1 and then 2 and now 3 targets. That's a clear sign that the coaches are trusting him more and more in these pass catching and long down and distance roles. The most obvious part of this matchup, why you should be starting Isaiah Pacheco as a pretty solid running back 2 with running back 1 upside, is that he gets the Houston Texans, and the Texans allow the most rushing yards to running backs on the season, and he's led the Chiefs, Pacheco has led the Chiefs in rushing yards each of the last 5 weeks. Fire up your Isaiah Pacheco, play him with confidence. There are not very many running backs who you will be starting over Isaiah Pacheco. Worst case, put him in your flex position, and you're going to be all set for winning your fantasy playoff matchup. Another player I am very bullish on this week, and you need to be starting, is running back J.K. Dobbins of the Baltimore Ravens. His expert consensus ranking on Fantasy Pros is running back 22. I have him as the running back 12 for this week. As I said, I'm very bullish. Dobbins showed exactly what we wanted to see from him. Vision and burst down the field. And look, he received criticism for not finishing his 50-yard run the way we wanted him to, but Dobbins still showed that breakaway speed. He finished 15 for 120 and 1 on the ground as he returned from the knee injury. And in week 15, this is the key for J.K. Dobbins. He's got a smash matchup against the Cleveland Browns. And this Browns rushing defense allows the third most fantasy points to the running back position. And it's been the third most favorable run defense per Football Outsiders metric, DVOA metric. So fire up J.K. Dobbins as a running back, high-end running back 2, low-end running back 1. He's my running back 12. I see a lot of upside for Dobbins. It's a good matchup. I'm not worried about Kenyon Drake or Gus Edwards eating into J.K. Dobbins in the way that would prohibit him from getting into this running back 12. I mean, he was running back 9 this past week. So let's not get carried away. I mean, I'm even lower than what the ranking was last week. So J.K. Dobbins, fire him up with confidence. We saw what we wanted to see, and we should be happy with it. All right. If you like the content, make sure you're hitting that red subscribe button. It really helps the channel. And if you have questions or comments or you want some start sit, make sure you put those into the chat. Really appreciate you doing that. I'm going to advise you this week to sit Raheem Mostert. And we haven't seen Mostert carry the ball more than 11 times since week 8 against Detroit. And even then, he went 14 for 64 on the ground. And he finishes the running back 36. And I know Jeff Wilson is trending to miss. And so it might be a flashy pick I'm going to play Raheem Mostert. There's just a lot of risk with this match. But I already talked about how the weather may impact it. But the Buffalo Bills are also not an easy matchup. They give up the 10th fewest fantasy points to running backs. They are the 3rd toughest rush DVOA matchup. And they're projected by PFF to have a 53% advantage over the ailing Miami offensive line. Start Raheem Mostert at your own risk. It's not an upside play, in my opinion. You're going to hope that he falls in the end zone and becomes a running back 2 for you if you put him in your lineup. It's too much a risk for me. I'm sitting Raheem Mostert in most cases this week. But I am starting Chris Olave this week. Chris Olave, the rookie for the New Orleans Saints, has been on a bit of a cold streak as he's headed into the bye. He's finished as the wide receiver 39 or worse in 3 of his last 4 games. And despite that, this impressive rookie is still wide receiver 6 in air yards, wide receiver 5 in air yards share, wide receiver 7 in average target distance, wide receiver 3 in deep targets, wide receiver 11 in receiving yards, wide receiver 10 in yards per route run, and wide receiver 10 in yards per team pass attempt. He is also the wide receiver 19 in fantasy points per game. So a solid wide receiver 2 on the season. The Atlanta matchup it is prime for fantasy points. And the Falcons allow the 5th most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. They are the 4th most positive matchup in pass DVOA metric. And the Saints have a projected 26% pass block advantage over the Falcons defensive line. Andy Dalton's going to hit Chris Olave for a couple of big plays in this game. Fire up your Chris Olave as a solid wide receiver too. Do not leave him on your bench just because he's been cold as of late. QQ from YouTube. Thoughts on Okonkwo for this week since I sat Kittle? No, you sat Kittle. Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, man. QQ. Oh, that's why you got to watch my Kittle video. I talked about how Kittle had a really, really good matchup this week, and you should have started him, for instance, over Evan Ingram. But Chig Okonkwo, he's right now my why did this not update? That's bizarre. Yeah, I have him as my tight end. Let's see. Let's move him here. My tight end 14. I think that's the right spot for him. Let's see where he is in the consensus rankings. But yeah, he's consensus 14. How about that? But Okonkwo's played, 50, 51% of snaps. So I think he's a high-end tight end too. Like I'm starting, for instance, Tyler Conklin over Chig Okonkwo because there's like a really nice matchup in Detroit. You can see Conklin just going into the end zone against the Lions, especially if it's, Mike White, who's been hyper targeting Tyler Conklin as of late. Tyler Conklin, 15 targets over the last 2 games. And you can imagine in those short yardage situations, Conklin getting that. But I think Okonkwo's fine matchup if you need a fill-in tight end. Like if you sat Kittle, for instance. Oh, I'm so sorry that he's going to ride your bench there, QQ. Yeah, I think he's a high-end tight end too right now. All right, let's keep her rolling. Make sure you're putting your comments or questions in the chat while I'm going through some of the players I'm advising you to start or sit or who I have opinions on for this week. I want you to start Terry McLaurin this week. And the last time the Giants and Commanders squared off, McLaurin went 8 for 105 on 12 targets, and he scored a touchdown. He finishes the wide receiver 8. McLaurin is the wide receiver 17 on the season. He's seen double-digit targets in 2 of his last 4 games. He also has a 93% projected advantage per PFF against the Giants secondary. Like the last time that McLaurin played, it was against the Giants. So this is poised to be a deja vu game. Nothing has really changed. You know that it's going to be Taylor Heinicke targeting Terry McLaurin down the field. You should be able to fire up Terry McLaurin once again as a pretty solid wide receiver too. So you're starting McLaurin this week. Also, which 2 wide receivers would you start? Smith, Chark, or Moore? I'm assuming that is Devonta Smith. Okay. DJ Chark or Elijah Moore. Those are the players that I think you're talking about. If it's DJ Moore, let me know. But I would have, which 2 am I starting? I'm starting Devonta Smith and I'm starting Elijah Moore. DJ Chark will probably get the Sauce Gardner treatment this week. Someone in my comments asked, is Amon-Ra St. Brown going to be downgraded due to a matchup against Sauce Gardner? And I said, no. Amon-Ra St. Brown plays 60 to 70% of snaps out of the slot. Sauce Gardner plays almost all of his snaps out wide. So they aren't going to play against each other. You're going to get Devonta Smith or you're going to get Amon-Ra St. Brown in space. He's going to make moves out of the slot. I'm not fading Amon-Ra St. Brown, but I am fading DJ Chark this week. So Devonta Smith, you are firing up. I talked about him just a little bit ago. And then, Elijah Moore. This is perfect. This is exactly what I wanted because I want you to fire up Elijah Moore. Elijah Moore is the perfect cheap stack with Mike White. The Lions give up the most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the year, and they also give up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. And Moore finally eclipsed 80% snap share. And that was the first time since he had gotten 80% of snaps since before his benching. He is back to a full-time player. Now, Corey Davis did leave this game early, but Elijah Moore, he played ahead. He played more snaps than Denzel Mims. Elijah Moore earned 10 targets. He caught 6 passes. He earned his 4th red zone target over the last 2 games. And you need to find a way to just squeeze in Elijah Moore into your week 15 lineups. He's my wide receiver 27, and I just keep talking myself more and more into Elijah Moore this week. It's just such a good matchup. We see him trending the right way. Fire up your Elijah Moores. He's the consensus wide receiver 41, which makes absolutely no sense to me. You need to be playing Elijah Moore with a lot of confidence this week. He's got the pedigree. He's got the production. He was the wide receiver 1 overall in a week last year against the Indianapolis Colts. And that was with, I think, Mike White left the game early, and Josh Johnson had to step in and be the quarterback. So there was even a quarterback transition, and Elijah Moore was still, one of the best wide receivers last year. So fire up your Elijah Moore. He's got talent. He's got pedigree. He's been trending the right way. He's got a great matchup. All of it. Fire up your Elijah Moores this week. QQ asks, would it be reckless benching Joe Burrow for Mike White? I think that's a little too far. I do have Mike White as my quarterback 8. Burrow is my quarterback 6. So I see them as close, but I feel like I've pushed up Mike White enough already. So I'm not willing to throw Joe Burrow, into that tier. I feel like there is a tier gap between 7 and 8. I have Justin Fields at 7 right now. Fields is healthy. He is back from his sickness. He practiced today, and he gets the Philadelphia Eagles, which is the reason why I have him at 7. I still have him in the top 7 quarterback. But the Eagles give up the fewest fantasy points to the quarterback position. They're the second toughest pass DVOA matchup, and the Philadelphia Eagles have a 32% pass block advantage on their offensive line versus the Chicago Bears, or the Philadelphia Eagles defensive line versus the Chicago Bears offensive line. So would it be reckless benching Joe Burrow for Mike White? Ultimately, I think there's just a tier gap between Joe Burrow and Mike White there, but I am bullish on Mike White, but let's not get carried away, QQ. One of the wide receivers I want you to sit this week is Mack Hollins. And let's talk about Mack Hollins here. Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller were just activated off of the injured reserve list, and they should be returning very shortly to the Vegas Raiders lineup. I'm not sure if they're going to play this week, but at least their activation is a warning sign that Mack Hollins, the day to sell was 3 days ago. Okay. But even with those wide receivers, those receiving options out, because Waller, even though he's a tight end, he's still like a wide receiver build. Hollins hasn't been much more than a high risk wide receiver 4. In fact, he's finished as the wide receiver 54 and 44 each of the last 2 weeks. He's projected only a 13% advantage per PFF against the New England secondary. You're thinking, 13%, that sounds great. It's actually not at all. PFF, remember, gives these advantages from 0 to 100, and the average is 50. And so for Mack Hollins to have a 13% advantage, that's not very good. It's mostly that there's like an 87% advantage of the coverage of the New England secondary that PFF is projecting over the Mack Hollins matchup. So trusting the likes of Mack Hollins is just so risky now that we're in the playoffs. Like if you're in best ball, fine, whatever, like a fluke play can happen. But I'm telling you, you should consider Elijah Moore as a priority, Jahan Dotson, or if you want to take a deep cut, Jameson Williams over Mack Hollins if you want like a similar tier type of wide receiver that's probably available. So I would consider picking up Elijah Moore, Jameson Williams, or Jahan Dotson if you had been relying on Mack Hollins the rest of the going into the fantasy playoffs. The last wide receiver that I'm advising you to sit this week is wide receiver Adam Thielen. And the reason is very clear. Thielen gets the Isaiah Rodgers treatment this weekend. Isaiah Rodgers, per player profiler, has given up more than 23 receiving yards only one time this season. And Thielen, he's had an up and down year. He's finished over the last 4 weeks. He's finished as a top 12 wide receiver in 2 of those games. But in the weeks he didn't finish as a top 12 wide receiver, he finished outside wide receiver 67 both of those weeks. It's just that the floor is so scary for Adam Thielen in this really bad matchup. This Colts secondary gives up the fewest fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. You know Justin Jefferson is going to get his. You know TJ Hawkinson is going to get his. Adam Thielen is just a high-risk wide receiver. Could he fall in the end zone? Absolutely. Adam Thielen knows for the end zone, at least in previous seasons. But he's felt the touchdown regression this year. If you are in desperate straits, fine. Like, plug in Thielen. You might not have a better option. But if you do have, heck, I have Elijah Moore over Adam Thielen this week. If you have better options, you should consider benching or sitting Adam Thielen for your fantasy football rosters. You should consider starting Tyler Conklin this week. And the tight end position is bad. When Tyler Conklin finishes as the tight end 13 on a week with 5 fantasy points in half PPR, Conklin has been one of the trusted targets, though, for Mike White. And as I mentioned earlier, if he's getting these short yardage targets, he's going to be a red zone or end zone target. And we've seen that hit a couple times, like, for instance, in his 3 touchdown game. But, even if White isn't able to go against the Lions, maybe it's Joe Flacco, maybe it's Zach Wilson. But Conklin was targeted 24 times in Joe Flacco's starts. And that's including one game where Conklin finishes the tight end 5. The Lions give up the 4th most fantasy points to tight ends. And I think that you need to bump up Tyler Conklin in as a matchup streaming tight end option here. So Conklin, I think it's going to be Mike White, and Mike White's been targeting him. It's clear that Conklin should be bumped up in your rankings, and you should consider starting him if you missed out on, like, the Chigo Conquos of the world. You should also consider starting Taysom Hill at tight end. He's the expert consensus tight end 9 for this week. And over his last 3 games, Taysom Hill has played 50% of snaps in each of those games. And that's something that he hasn't done all year. During that time, Taysom Hill has finished, has 2 wow, that was terrible. During that time, Taysom Hill has 2 top 9 finishes at tight end. And this week, he gets the Atlanta Falcons, whom he torched for 15 fantasy points and as the tight end 3 overall finish. Now, when we look at other tight end options, like in that similar tier, Taysom Hill just offers the highest upside, like the access to the highest fantasy scores. So risk it for the biscuit. This is one of those plays where, if he gives you 0, so could literally any of the other tight ends in this tier, but Taysom Hill can access those higher point totals, and that's why you need to fire him up. He's been playing more snaps. He's been more consistent as of late, and we've seen ceiling games from Taysom Hill. Fire him up, especially because Mark Ingram is out for the year. You wonder if Taysom Hill is going to get a little bit more run out of the Wildcat. All right, if you like the content that you hear, you're new, make sure you're hitting that red subscribe button. It really, really helps. And you can also throw your comments or questions for week 15 into the comments section. Really appreciate y'all jumping in. This is always a lot of fun. QQ from YouTube. I'm starting Chargers defense for my playoffs since they got a good schedule in the playoffs. Yeah, let's talk about some DSTs for just a second. Hopefully it doesn't bore anyone. But the Chargers, really? I mean, Chargers get Tennessee. That's one of the highest over-unders on the week. So, I have the Chargers as my DST 21. They finished as DST 16 or worse in 4 of the last 5 games. Now, granted, that was against San Francisco, Kansas City, Arizona, Miami. So I don't know. I don't have a lot of trust in the Chargers. Like, here are my top 10 for this week, QQ. Number 1, the Kansas City Chiefs. 2, the Green Bay Packers. 3, the Philadelphia Eagles. 4, the New Orleans Saints. 5th, the Steelers. 6th, the Panthers. 7th, the Denver Broncos. 8, the Commanders. The 9th were the Seahawks. 10th were the Browns, and 11th were the 40. Well, I gave you an 11th. The 49ers were my 11th. So there you go. Hopefully that'll help you find someone on your waiver wire. Maybe you can keep sifting through. A tight end I want you to consider benching this week, or you shouldn't even consider putting into your starting lineups, is Mike Gesicki. And I've been harping on Miami Dolphins, right? I think the only players I haven't said to sit are Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Every other player, Raheem Mostert, Tua Tagovailoa, and now Mike Gesicki, you should be sitting them. Gesicki has finished as the tight end 47 or worse and earned 2 or fewer targets in 4 of the last 5 games. Even with both Waddle and Hill hobbled on Sunday night, Gesicki couldn't get anything going. He hasn't had a catch since week 10. Since week 10 against Cleveland. Now he gets a tough Buffalo defense and an even tougher tight end linebacker matchup against Tremaine Edmonds. This is one of the lower over-unders on the week. We already talked about the weather and how offenses might be struggling to get going. So all of those factors, Gesicki's not been doing well. The matchup, the weather, all of it is just so bad. So I am advising you to sit or not to get cute, and you're not starting Mike Gesicki this week. Now I want to shift into changing perspectives on players, or at least like tempering expectations for some, or looking up, players that maybe you weren't thinking about. One of the players that you need to change your perspective on this week is Patrick Mahomes. Okay. Patrick Mahomes, he's faced some pretty tough secondaries as of late. The Rams, Bengals, Broncos, they've all limited to Mahomes as quarterback 6 or worse each of the last 3 weeks. In fact, the lost in the road win against Denver was that Mahomes had thrown 3 interceptions, and now he gets the Houston Texans secondary. And while the Houston Texans, they rank poorly in graded metrics and efficiency metrics, they've given up the second fewest fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Why? Why, if Houston is so bad at defense, are they not giving up fantasy points to quarterbacks? And that's because they give up a ton of fantasy points to the running back position. In fact, they give up the most fantasy points. And I project this to be an Isaiah Pacheco game. I mentioned that Isaiah Pacheco is a start for me this week. You need to figure out a way to get him into your starting lineup. But Mahomes is startable. I mean, we're not benching Patrick Mahomes. We're just tempering expectations. He's my quarterback 5 on the week. I'm one of the lower rankers on Patrick Mahomes. Let me see if I can pull that up and see where exactly I am compared to the consensus. But his consensus, as I mentioned, is quarterback 2. And there are only 3 other rankers out of 200 who have Patrick Mahomes worse than I do this week at quarterback 5. So I am tempering expectations for Patrick Mahomes, and so should you. One of the running backs I am lower on this week is Alvin Kamara. And Kamara's consensus is running back 10. I don't understand. I just don't understand where you're getting running back 10 from. Kamara has struggled since week 9. He's finished no better than running back 19 during that span. And in fact, over the past 2 weeks, Alvin Kamara has finished as the running back 51 and running back 45 with 87 scrimmage yards on 27 touches. The touches he's been getting, he's been inefficient on, which is why you're thinking to yourself, well, okay, Mark Ingram's not going to play. Yeah, that hasn't mattered. In the touches that Alvin Kamara has gotten, he's not done a lot with them. It's been ugly. And while Atlanta may be a tempting matchup, the optimism is actually, it needs to be tempered. In week 1 against the Falcons, Alvin Kamara finished as the running back 47. He only had 46 total yards on 12 touches, less than 4 yards per touch. That's pretty terrible. And PFF, Pro Football Focus, projects the Atlanta Falcons defensive line to have a 44% run block advantage over the New Orleans Saints offensive line. And that's going to limit the rushing upside of Alvin Kamara. Kamara is outside my top 24 of running backs for this week. You need to be finding other options outside of Alvin Kamara. It's going to be more Taysom Hill and less Alvin Kamara. Unfortunately, Kamara is going to tease you with those targets, but he's done nothing with them. And he's teasing you with his 3 touchdown game this year where he finishes the running back 1 overall. He's teasing you with that. Don't give in. It's all a trap. Don't fall into the Alvin Kamara trap. It's going to be a bust week for him. I don't understand. And looking at the running back rankings, right, I have Alvin Kamara outside of my top 24. And looking at the half PPR rankings, I am okay. There's one ranker who has him at running back 30, one at 59, one at 60, and one at 101. I don't know. 2 of those players aren't even on the accuracy rankings. So there's only 2 legitimate players or rankers who are lower than me on Alvin Kamara this week. So you should find another option outside of Alvin Kamara. I'm out, but I want to say appreciate you so much. This has become my favorite fantasy channel. Thank you, QQ. I appreciate you tuning in when you do. Thanks so much. And be like QQ and make sure you're hitting that subscribe button so that when I go live, you can ask your questions. You can get into it. I appreciate all of you tuning in and asking your questions as I go through some of the players I want to chat about as well. Big Trev from YouTube, 2 wide receivers in a flex. DPJ, Thielen, Higgins, Ramondre, Rashad, full PPR. Okay, so here's the thing. I don't think that Ramondre is going to play. So that leaves us with DPJ, Thielen, Higgins, and Rashad White. I don't know if Higgins plays either. That's the thing. And so if we find out Mondre and Higgins are not going to play, then it's going to be DPJ, it's going to be Thielen, and it's going to be Rashad White. So I think the lineup decisions are going to be made for you, Big Trev. Okay. But if I were to bench and if we knew T. Higgins was full health, the coaches weren't teasing us, I would probably go, well, let me pull up my rankings because I think that Thielen and DPJ are going to be pretty close. Yeah, I have Thielen 1 spot ahead of DPJ. So that's where I'm at. Yeah, that's where I'm at. Okay. So Thielen ahead of DPJ, 1 spot. And I think that you're going to get some closure on those injuries, though. So pay attention to the injury reports for T. Higgins in particular. I don't think if I'm banking on it, I'm not expecting Ramondre to play this week. That's at least been the word on the street. We'll see if we get more out of the practices, but Ramondre didn't practice today. So yeah, we're not expecting Ramondre Stevenson to play. Mike White or Deshaun Watson. We're going with Mike White for this matchup. Pretty comfortably. I have Deshaun Watson as my quarterback 18 right now. Yikes. Against Baltimore. Yeah, I don't think that this is a super plus matchup. I think he does throw a touchdown and does go to David Njoku. But outside of that, like Amari Cooper is dealing with a pretty nagging hip injury that's going to limit him. Like Deshaun Watson finished as the quarterback 14 last week. He looked better, but he threw a lot more passes. And I wonder if Baltimore, because they're going to slow the ball down, slow the pace of the game down, I don't think Deshaun Watson is going to throw for 42. Is he going to throw for like 33 to 35 passes? I think that's the right range. But I think you have to temper expectations for Deshaun Watson. The secondary for the Baltimore Ravens is a lot tougher than what the metrics are saying. So I'm firing up Mike White over Deshaun Watson this week. All right. One of the players that you also need to be fading this week is Mike Evans. He is the wide receiver 23 in expert consensus rankings, but he falls. Where did he end up going? Yeah, there you go. So Mike Evans ends up being outside of my top 29. He's my wide receiver 30 right now. And we have to be concerned about Mike Evans, right? The last 5 weeks have not been kind to Evans. He's finished as the wide receiver 34 or worse each of those weeks, and he's finished as wide receiver 44 or worse in 4 of those games. He's fallen on the wrong side of variance, sure. Like Brady has missed him on deep passes, and Evans dropped a few big touchdown passes. But even though Evans has commanded a larger target share over the last 3 games, he has 22 targets, right? And 2 of those games, 9 targets each. He only has 10 receptions over the last 3 games, and Brady may lead the NFL in pass attempts, but his yards per attempt is 22nd. So he's really not hitting those deep passes for Mike Evans. So his yards per attempt, he's just dumping it off to Rachaad White. He's hitting Cade Otton. But Brady is also turning Chris Godwin into Deontay Johnson. And you hate to hear that, but you're like, oh, that's really not too far off. Like Brady is giving a high target share, low average depth of target to Chris Godwin, and that's exactly what's happening with Deontay Johnson. And Mike Evans is turning into this big play, boom bust wide receiver like George Pickens. So I think there's a parallelism here. That Brady is essentially a rich man's Kenny Pickett. Ooh, you hate to say that, but here we are. The matchup also doesn't help this week against Mike Evans, as the Cincinnati Bengals allow the 5th fewest fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Mike Evans is my wide receiver 30 this week. His consensus, wide receiver 23. So you're not firing up Mike Evans if you can help it this week. It's just not a good matchup. He's sharing target share. Brady's not played well. The offensive line isn't good. All of it. Mike Evans is a fade for me this week. Nathan Ruling from YouTube, thanks for the question. Do we go with Cam Akers or DeAndre Swift at running back? And that's actually a pretty good question because DeAndre Swift has a tough matchup against the New York Jets. I have him 3 spots ahead of Cam Akers, but I have moved Cam Akers up pretty high. Okay, Cam Akers' expert consensus ranking is running back 31. I have Cam Akers at running back 24 this week as a back-end running back 2. He's between Rachaad White and Donta Foreman for me and ahead of Alvin Kamara because the Green Bay Packers are the best rushing matchup per Football Outsiders DVOA metric. And yes, like Cam Akers has had some struggles earlier this season, but he's been running back 23 or better each of the last 2 weeks. He has gotten 29 carries, and he's fallen in the end zone. So that's all you're asking from a back end running back 2 who has a good matchup this week. So fire up your Cam Akers, but I still like DeAndre Swift better with the upside that he has catching passes. All right, the last player that I want to chat about tonight, if you want to throw more comments in the chat, feel free to do so. But the last player, I am bullish on David Njoku this week. I'm calling my shot here. David Njoku, the calculus is simple. He's the tight end 6 in fantasy points per game already. So this is like a median ranking for him or middle average ranking. He commands nearly a 25% target rate when he's on the field. He's tight end 7 in yards per route run and yards per target. He's tight end 6 in yards per team pass attempt. He's clearly in that top 6 tier, but this week, Amari Cooper, as I mentioned, is expected to be limited due to his hip injury. It is clearly limited Amari Cooper. Cooper has finished as the wide receiver 55 or worse each of the last 2 games. And we've seen success that David Njoku's had against the Baltimore Ravens already. Last time that they faced off in week 7, David Njoku 7 for 71, 7 targets. He finished as the tight end 5. He did not fall in the end zone, so he didn't get a touchdown and still finished as a top 5 tight end. If he gets a touchdown, right, he's accessed top 3 upside. right? 2 of his 3 games that he scored a touchdown, he's been a top 3 tight end. Week 3 against Pittsburgh, he went 9 for 89 and a touchdown, finished with 19 fantasy points. And then last week against Cincinnati, 7 for 59. He also had a rush for -2 yards, 9 targets. He had the touchdown, 15 fantasy points, tight end 3. Give me a David Njoku as tight end 2. I have it as Kelsey at number 1 and Njoku at number 2. And then I moved Kittle up from 5 to tight end 3 on the week. So let's get some bullish takes on David Njoku. I was bullish on George Kittle. I mean, you couldn't really be much more bullish, only 2 spots more than what I was. But fire up your David Njokus with a lot of confidence against the Baltimore Ravens, especially with an ailing Amari Cooper. Yeah, give me all the David Njoku. All right. Well, here we are, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate it. I've been on for an hour. Happy Friday. I will probably jump on tomorrow and do a live stream where I'm not going through as many. I know it's not as popular of a streaming day for Thursday, but I want to get some more content out for you. And I appreciate all of you jumping into the live stream, asking your questions. And make sure you're hitting that red subscribe button if you really do like my content. It matters a lot for the channel and for its growth. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, good luck in the fantasy football streets.
I embrace all this risk, I'm insane. Talking about that best bill, I'm the best till into the next world. Guess I got next still. Best bill, I'm the best till into the next world. Guess I got next still.